of the masses, give it back to the treasury, and let us organize the affairs of the people. Even in the judiciary, we can see the maximum prison sentence in Islam is 1 month. For some of the scholars, up to 1 year. You have people in prison in America for 60, 70,000 years. That is a system that does not work. You have so many people in prison, you have to make them in the desert. You have to release them. At the beginning of the 1990s, there were 1 million people in prison. At the end of the 1990s, 2 million. At that rate, by about 40 years, all of America will be in prison.
We missed the 1 minute warning. I apologize for that, Anjem. But we will reset the clock right now to David, and we've got 5 minutes for David Wood. Go right ahead.
Well, again, Anjem is complaining a lot about the West. I did give him statistics that the happiest countries in the world to a country are Western nations, and that there is a pattern, there's a correlation. The closer you get to the heart of the Muslim world, the less happy people are. Why? As much as he complains about the West, it must be far, far worse in the Muslim world. That's why people want to leave the Muslim world and come to the West. And anyone who lives in the West, you know this is nonsense. I walk down the street, my wife walks down the street, we do things, we go to school, we teach, we do all kinds of things. All my friends do. We don't get raped. Do these things happen in the country? Yes. But if you walk down the street, what do you find? You find peace, you find prosperity. Are there problems? Yes, again, but that happens everywhere in every society. So this anarchy that Anjem speaks about, I've never seen it. And I live in the Bronx. I live in one of the roughest cities in America, and I have no clue what our friend Anjem is talking about. And so there is this tendency to exaggerate all the problems of everyone else and to minimize the problems in Islam. But remember, the question before us is not, are there difficulties in the West? I granted that from the beginning. The question is Sharia the answer? Would Sharia help? And just think, because I think Anjem is really totally contradicting himself. He complains over and over again about the number of rapes. Open up the Quran and open up Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Sunan Abu Dawud and see how many rapes you find at the hands of Muslims. What happens when Muslims would conquer an area? Revelation would come down. You can have sex with these women. What about Surah 424? Anjem, what's the historical background for that? The historical background was that Muslims didn't want to have sex with these women because their husbands were there. Their husbands have been captured too. You've got husband and wife sitting there, and Muslims say, oh no, we can't have sex with these women. And then the revelation comes down, of course you can. Rape them all you want. They're your captives. So think about what's going on here. Anjem complains, rape is something that's really, really bad. Violence is something that's really, really bad. Hey, I agree. The problem is those things are at the heart of Sharia law. You can rape your women all you want under Sharia. You can go on a killing spree in Sharia. You can do those things. So Anjem has complained about things, and yet we find Sharia teaches exactly these things. So Anjem has contradicted himself. He's complaining about things that are fundamental to Sharia law. And so, in other words, if rape and violence are bad, which I believe they are, then Sharia is not going to help, because Sharia makes these things part of the will of God. So we have to reject Muhammad as a prophet, since he's the one who delivered these revelations saying all these things that Anjem is complaining about are perfectly acceptable. We have to reject Muhammad and therefore the law system that goes back to him. So what reason do we have to think that Islam will help anything? Again, is this going to help Christians? No, we'd be second-class citizens. Jews would be second-class citizens if they're not all slaughtered. Women, the rights that they have, and Anjem still he's complaining about things like makeup and stuff. What about Islamic law, where a husband can beat his wife into submission, where he can have 4 wives, where you can rape your female captives, where girls who are 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 years old are not protected because the Quran in Surah 65:4 says you can have sex with these girls all you want. Why does he think that our society would become better by adding all these new problems that we don't have to deal with? We don't have to deal with polygamy. We don't have to deal with people marrying 6 and 7-year-old girls. We don't have to deal with these. But if we adopt Sharia, we would have to. So we have a system here. And again, I agree with a ton of the things Anjem is saying about the West. I think we need to deal with them. But we can deal with them within our system. A century and a half ago, there was slavery. There's no slavery anymore. Why? We dealt with it. Women couldn't vote a little over a century ago. And they can vote now. Racial segregation, all these problems that you look at the end of the 1700s and then the 1800s, we dealt with them. Again, new problems arise, but we deal with them within our system you don't deal with them by bringing in this new system that hasn't worked anywhere. And again, when Anjem says, oh, no, it works, what's he do? He says, oh, but 1,000 years ago, it worked somewhere. Well, Anjem, you have 47 countries. You have a quarter of the world's population. Where are the great scientific developments? Where's the great community developments in the Muslim world? Show me a place. Show me one of your 47 countries where someone who lives in the West would sit back and say, wow, I really want to move there. Or some non-Muslim would say, I really want to go there because Sharia law is so wonderful. Show us these places. Shouldn't Muslims be winning a quarter of the Nobel Prizes, be coming up with a quarter of the scientific development? Shouldn't Muslims be doing these things? Why don't we see it? Why is it that Islam suffocates cultures, suffocates these places? Why is it that Islam suffocates scientific and philosophical development?
Thank you, David. Okay, again, apologize for the abruptness, but we're going to move on to the next section, which is our crossfire section. Each of you will have 2 minutes to make a statement, and at this point, we're resetting the clock. And Anjem, you have 2 minutes now. Go ahead and start our crossfire.
Yes, you know, it's very interesting that David, on the one hand, you know, it seems to me his knowledge about Islam is based upon maybe 1 or 2 trips to the library. And that's not very good, is it, David? Because you fabricated a lot of things about Islam and Muslims. And quite honestly, I'm not going to deal with your lies. Nowhere does it say in the Quran that you can rape people and, you know, just use them for your own desire. This is rubbish. But what is, in fact, what is reality is that the international statistics, National Institute of Justice, said that 1 or 5% of the U.S. population molest their own children. And in fact, in the USA, every 15 seconds, a woman is battered. Okay, so you're dealing with the problem. So what is it going to be in a few years' time? It's going to be every 20 seconds or something like that? Is that the way we deal with that problem? I think that, you know, you have become so used to the darkness and the hegemony of your own law, you cannot see outside of your own co-circle. People are being raped and abused. You know, they say that, you know, every second, you know, there's sexual abuse, and I don't even know the statistics because there's so many of them. But let me tell you something about Islam. In Islam, the femininity and the masculinity of both the male and the female is protected. The Prophet said, do not employ the woman except for what she can do with her hands, even the handsome man, except for his effort. So you would never employ someone because of their gender or sexuality in Islam. It's completely prohibited, let alone a secretary or something like that, which happens all the time in the West. Moreover, countries like Sudan and Ethiopia used to be known as the fruit bowls of Africa when the Sharia was implemented. They used to export fruit. Nowadays, they're holding their begging bowls outside. Why? Not because of the Muslims there, but because you have your puppet leaders in the area. Let's not forget that the Iraqi dictator was propped up by the American regime. The only weapons of mass destruction you found in Iraq were the ones you dropped upon the Iraqi population. And the only weapons of mass destruction you found in Afghanistan, the ones you slaughtered the people with under the guise of propaganda, freedom, and democracy. Over 1 million children died because of the sanctions of the oppressive regimes. You know, it's no surprise that you're going to quote people like the United Nations and your own institutions, because they're corrupt just the way that you are.
Thank you, Anjem.
We need to go back, you know.
Thank you, Anjem. Okay, David, you now have 2 minutes for your time in our crossfire section. Please, go right ahead.
Anjem began by saying that I don't know what I'm talking about with Islam. He only gave one example of what I said that was false. He said that the Quran doesn't allow rape of women. Well, let's examine the facts here. Surah 424 says that certain married women are prohibited unless you capture them, except those whom your right hands possess. So you can't have sex with a married woman unless you've captured her. We know from the Muslim sources, unless Anjem wants to throw out the hadith, which I know he doesn't want to do, we know from the hadith what the historical situation for that revelation. I already said it. Again, Muslims conquer an area, but they conquered the men and the women. So they capture all of these women who are married. And the Muslims go to Muhammad saying, we don't want to have sex with these women because they're married. Great, guys. Great. Don't have sex with them. You're right. Don't have sex with these married women. But that's when Surah 424 came down saying, you can have all the sex you want with these women. Now, what does Anjem think of that? That these women who had just been captured, whose family members have been slaughtered, suddenly really want the Muslims? Oh, we really want to have sex with these guys. No. That revelation gave them permission to rape these women. That's what it is. And if Anjem wants to say it's not true, he's got his own sources to deal with. And then Anjem once again contradicted his own teachings. He complained about women being battered in the United States. Anjem knows what Surah 434 says, and it gives husbands the right to beat their wives into submission. He knows that Muhammad beat Aisha. He knows that a woman was brought a woman was brought to Muhammad and that her skin was greener than her clothes, according to Aisha. She sought justice. Will you stop my husband? Muhammad sent her away saying, you talked about your husband. You said bad things about your husband. Get out of here. He didn't help her. So what do we have? Anjem is complaining about all these things, rape and violence and abuse of women, and they're exactly the things that are condoned and supported under Sharia law. They're not supported by our system. We throw people in jail.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Okay, and now we will let Anjem respond in 2 minutes.
Yes, I mean, David, I think you should realize one thing, that the Sharia is in fact not implemented anywhere in the world nowadays. The last time it was implemented as a law and order was before the 3rd of March 1924. Therefore, the countries which you see today, in fact, are dictatorships and they're barbaric, just as much as the American regime is in fact barbaric. And when you talk about, women being able to be beaten in Islam, that's not what Allah said in the Quran in chapter 434. It said to advise them, and it said to, separate the beds, etc., in order to avoid any kind of physical confrontation. And I note that he did not deal with the statistic of every 15 seconds a woman's being battered in America. And moreover, when you look at your own history, I mean, he talks about how the assault against slavery, etc., the 200th conference on the anniversary of the formal end of the slave trade in Jamaica said that many churches were actively involved, in fact, in the transatlantic trade in Africans and colonialism. The church is guilty of promoting racism and colonialism that destroyed the African societies. So if we have mayhem nowadays, it's because of your own, if you like, antics in Muslim countries. And we can see, as far back as just the 1960s, people were racist. Even now, if you go to America in the South, in the Midwest, you have all of this racism, the Ku Klux Klan, etc. Who are you trying to kid? I mean, as I said, if you're black in America and you get a job, that's a feat nowadays. And he talks about institutions. And I was just saying earlier, how is it that he talks about peace prizes and prizes for development when Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize? And we know that he increased the troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he's got more blood on his hands than even Bush had before because of the number of people he's sending to their death. And incidentally, it is the American soldiers who are committing suicide, and the British in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's not even one incident of any Muslim having committed suicide. Why? Because your war is unjust, your government is corrupt, and you have an oppressive foreign policy. None of the Muslims are committing suicide. Name me one example, and we'll go there, we'll find out. And yet the Americans are committing suicide.
Very much. Okay. David, you will now have 2 minutes to respond to that.
Muslims committing suicide, it happens almost every day when a Muslim blows himself up trying to kill the kuffar. He says Sharia is not being implemented anywhere in the world. Notice when I spoke, I quoted a bunch of things from Islam. So I'm not sure what countries today have to do with what I said in that previous statement. But think about what he's saying. Sharia doesn't work. Muslims have 47 countries and a quarter of the world's population, and they can't get Sharia to work anywhere. Well, if it can't work in the Muslim world, and even Muslims aren't willing to implement it because they don't like it, why would we think that we should adopt it here in the West? It just doesn't make any sense. Now, he again complained about women being battered, and he says that's not what the Quran says. Well, in Surah 434, it talks about if you fear rebellion on the part of your wives, you admonish them, leave them alone in sleeping places, and beat them. We know the historical situation. A woman came to Muhammad for justice. The handprint was still on her face where her husband had slapped her in the face. She came to Muhammad for justice. Muhammad was about to rule in her favor, and then Surah 434 came down saying, too bad. And what did Muhammad say? He said, I wanted one thing, I wanted one thing and Allah wanted something else. In other words, I wanted to rule in your favor, but Allah didn't want to. In Sahih Muslim number 2127, Muhammad hits Aisha in her chest. You have over and over again, Umar beating women, Abu Bakr beating women. You have this over and over again in the Muslim sources, and if Anjem wants me to quote some of them, no problem. But think about this. Anjem complains, there's abuse in the West. I agree, it's horrible, but we need to do something about that. That would include punishing the offenders. If we bring in Sharia, that just makes it okay. What did Muhammad say? No one shall be asked as to why he beat his wife. So all the abuse you're complaining about, Anjem, Sharia doesn't fix that. It just makes it the will of God. And you can't even ask him. Right now, we catch a man beating his wife, we throw him in jail. Under Sharia, you can't even ask him why he beat his wife. That's your law. So your law cannot deal with the problems.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.